My name is Virgil Falloon, and I'm the project coordinator with the Al Huda Organization for Widows and Orphans Care, and this is a project proposal for 2016, including three things. One, establish a food waste compost operation. Number two, install home gardens in host neighborhoods. And number three, create a community garden at the Kustapa refugee camp. The objectives of the project are to capitalize on free food scraps from schools, hotels, restaurants for the compost operation, install home gardens in Zaytun City host neighborhoods, install a community garden at Kustapa refugee camp. We want to improve household food security and alleviate micronutrient deficiencies, enhance food security by providing direct access to a diversity of nutritionally rich foods, increase the purchasing power from savings on food bills, and provide fallback provisions during times of food shortages. We also want to create jobs for self-reliance, sustainability, and environmental repair, and provide income from sales of garden compost and produce that we grow at the gardens. The need for this project is overwhelming. Iraq's crisis is driven by unpredictable, massive waves of displaced people. With conditions worsening, people are struggling desperately to cope. Widespread agricultural shortages are likely, with large numbers of newly displaced people requiring emergency assistance. Nearly 2.4 million people are food insecure. Food assistance is at risk, and basic agriculture production is urgently needed. Many gardeners face limitations of poor soil fertility or lack of cultivatable soil. Here are some of the activities we will be involved in. The project aims to minimize the impacts of food insecurity and price inflation on host communities and the Kustapa refugee camp in order to promote good nutrition and peaceful coexistence. It will promote refugee participation and engagement in agricultural-based livelihoods as a way of promoting social cohesion and building resilience for future food shocks. The project will provide fresh, nutritious food on a regular basis that is locally grown organically for half the cost of emergency food parcels. Displaced persons and host communities will receive basic inputs for vegetable gardening with a focus on growing the most nutritious greens and other vegetables that we can do. Natural gardening strategies will be implemented, including raised beds, vertical trestling, straw bale gardening, composting worm towers, and other permaculture principles. Food scraps will be collected 3 times weekly from cooperating schools, hotels, and restaurants for shredding and composting that will provide living soil on a regular basis for the gardens and provide a source of income with retail sales of the finished product. Vegetable production, consumption, and caloric intake will increase 50% after implementation of the gardens. Vegetables are an important source of vitamins and minerals in the diet. They are easy to grow and cheap to produce, particularly leafy vegetables. Focus will be placed on growing 13 of the most nutritious greens. Home gardens can play an important role in changing social and livelihood issues and can be managed easily by idle family labor. It only takes a few days to set up a garden and an hour a day for maintenance. During my recent trip to Erbil, I had the opportunity to speak to a number of people regarding the proposed project, and I got favorable results. People were very excited and encouraged about the prospects of doing this project. However, funding is very limited, and they weren't able at this time to provide any funding. However, many of them have other resources and assets that could be utilized for the project. For example, FAO can provide the vegetable seeds we need for free. The World Health Organization and the Ministry of Health in Erbil are beginning to understand that it's not just a matter of vaccinations and distributing medications for people who are ill. They are beginning to realize that good nutrition plays an important role in making people healthy. The organization Together to Protect Human and the Environment can help us with our project to educate the schools and the restaurants and hotel people in the collection of food scraps. And the camp director at the Kushtapa refugee camp has generously offered us a place where we could put the community garden and home gardens in at the camp. The budget includes the things we will need in order to initiate the project. We need a Bobcat front-end loader with an auger and tiller attachment. We need the azomite, the minerals and rare earth elements that are so vital to adding to the compost so that the plants can uptake the nutrients. We need the 10 horsepower dual drive shredder for shredding the food scraps and other biomass materials like manures, wood chips, branches, leaves, cardboard, wood pallets, things of that nature. We need the organic fertilizer to get started from Sulemania. We need the PVC pipe to make the worm towers, the vertical fencing for trellis gardening. We're going to need a lot of straw, which we can get for free after the harvest of the wheat in June and July. We're going to have some administration costs and project coordinator expenses. We want to purchase initially 100 food-grade plastic barrels for the collection of the food scraps. We'd like to erect a compost building 44 by 24 feet diameter. And we're going to need 2 or 3 Mitsubishi long bed trucks, fuel, and drivers for collecting the food scraps. This is the Bobcat that I was talking about with the front end loader and the 2 attachments. The attachment there is the auger, which will allow us to drill holes in the ground for the worm towers. And slide 11 is the actual cost estimate of the machine. Slide 12 is the Al Huda logo that we use. Slide 13 is a map of the city of Erbil, where Al Huda in Erbil is located. Slide 14 and 15 is the headquarters in Erbil of Al Huda, the main entrance, the building and the main entrance to the offices. The first thing we want to do when I return to Erbil in mid-February is to get the food scraps to compost operation going. We will be purchasing the plastic barrels, labeling them, and distributing them to the participating schools. We want to hold some school workshops and distribute educational packets to participating schools so that we can teach the students how to make compost. I'm hopeful by the time I return in February that the shredder machine will be already delivered from Istanbul, and then we're going to arrange for the Mitsubishi trucks and drivers for the pickup of the food scrap barrels. We're going to take all of that food scrap material to a location and begin separating out plastics or other things that we're not going to be able to put through the shredder, and construct a small, useful compost building where the breakdown of the materials will happen and we'll be making some really good soil. While making our own compost for the gardens, it will also solve another problem, which is the disposal of waste, solid waste in Erbil. Right now, all of it is being collected and basically taken outside of town and dumped on the ground. There really aren't any landfills to handle this kind of massive solid waste disposal. This is a study that was conducted by the Department of Environmental Science at Salahuddin University in Erbil. And basically the message here is, of all the solid waste coming from people's houses, 76% of it is food scraps, which we can collect for free and use to make our compost. This chart illustrates the percentage of food scraps that are coming from a person's home. Slides 20 through 22 represent the barrels that we're going to purchase, label, and use for the collection of the food scraps from the schools and then hopefully hotels and restaurants down the road. Slide 23 and 24 are the Mitsubishi trucks that will be utilized to distribute and collect the food scrap barrels from the various locations. I included this map in the PowerPoint presentation to illustrate the way in which neighborhoods are divided up in the city, so that you can see each of these little squares or little sections will eventually become individual territories for the pickup of the food scraps in the neighborhood. I can imagine a time where one truck per neighborhood is collecting all of the food scraps. Once we've collected all of the food scraps from the schools and possibly hotels and restaurants, we'll bring them to a central location such as this one in the state of Oregon, where you can see the food scraps, the cardboard boxes to the top right, wooden pallets and other wood products that we can run through the shredder along with the cardboard and the food scraps, and kind of a pre-composting operation. And then once we have the shredded material, we'll be putting that material into the compost building so that it can start its process of degrading and breaking down and into the compost material that we seek to make. I included this as an illustration of the kinds of other biomass materials that we can shred and use for composting purposes. In this case, a stack of branches from trees. Slide 28 is an illustration of straw bales that we collect in Nebraska and use for mulching and for composting. Slide 29 is horse manure with straw in it that we also use for composting purposes. That's the collection of leaves put in paper bags that we collect around the neighborhoods and pile them up and run them through a shredder as well, and they break down and help make compost as well. Slides 31 through 33 are two examples of a food shredder. These are single axle. We're looking for a dual axle shredder that would use the teeth would look something more like slide 34, where everything gets put in there and just ground up into, particulate matter that's maybe 1/4 of an inch or a 1/2 inch thick. These are wood chips that have been run through a wood chipper. The shredder that we're purchasing for Erbil will do the same thing. And these wood chips are used then either for mulching purposes or for lining the rows between the beds to help preserve moisture in the ground. I pulled this clump of composted material with these red wiggler worms out of one of the worm towers after, I suppose, 2 or 3 weeks of activity, and you can see the richness of the material, of the compost material that we want to use to grow the food. Composting materials will break down naturally by themselves with some help from the microorganisms that do exist or will come to the pile as it's breaking down. However, slide 37 is the red wiggler, the most prolific worker that I know for making really good soil. And if we can find some of these and use these in the compost operation, we'll have the finest soil that you can possibly make, thanks to the worms. This is an example of a composting building structure where we put the shredded food scraps into each of these bins, and we'll cover them and water them and let them begin the composting operation. Is what the breakdown process begins to look like after so many weeks. And then slide 40, after everything has been broken down, you have a finished composted product which we can then bag or put on a truck and use at our sites, our garden sites, wherever they may be. It's just an example of a much larger operation, composting operation, and perhaps at one point down the road we'll get to the stage where we'll be able to create a facility like this and make massive amounts of composted material for gardens for everywhere. The city of Eugene, Oregon, in the United States, has a program of collecting food scraps and composting, and they have a school training manual that they have created. It's about 40 pages long, and it's everything you need to know about teaching students how to do the process. We will use this as our guide when we go to the schools and for training purposes. The second phase of the project will be to install home gardens in host neighborhoods. So one of the first things we want to do when I return is to hold some meetings with the neighborhood officials and community mobilization for the gardens. We'll want to do a baseline survey of garden site determinations and registration of participants by Al-Huda staff. We'll figure out what home garden designs will be best, and we'll procure the vegetable seeds from the Food and Agricultural Organization at the UN. At the same time, we'll want to obtain as much organic fertilizer from Sulaymaniyah as we can. I'm thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 tons to start with. We want to receive our shipment of azomite and store that for use, purchase the PVC pipe for the worm towers and purchase the vertical fencing, and then begin delivering the garden inputs and install at least 100 home gardens in Zaytun City to begin with, and hopefully that will continue to repeat itself on a weekly basis. This is pretty much a typical scene in an island or in a section of town that are surrounded by homes and apartment buildings. And they're really kind of just turned into junkyards. People aren't really doing too much with these spaces, although there are some attempts, as you see in slide 45, of someone trying to start a garden. But they're digging the soil and then planting in it and there's no real nutrition. The soil is pretty much dead. And so even though I applaud their efforts, they're going to get a much better result when we can supply them with the azomite and the organic fertilizers, composted materials that we hope to provide them. This is a picture of my trip to Zaytun City, where I was able to meet with some of the neighborhood of spokespeople and some of the officials. And of course the kids are very interested in what's going on. And we're actually standing on a piece of land that could be used for a very large community garden. It's pretty desolate and pretty bad soil, but once we bring in the materials and start the composting operation, we can turn this around in a fairly quick period of time. This is a walk through the neighborhood and through the housing project units, where there are quite a few. I mean, each one of these housing units has a space like you see in slide 49 and 50 and 51, kind of a little backyard garden space. But again, the ground is so hard packed and so dead, it's hard to believe that anything can grow. But with our help, we can turn that around and make this a very flourishing vegetable garden for home use. This is a hand drawing I did when I was thinking about different ways in which we could install home gardens in Zaytun City. On the left you see where we could use some fencing, trellising, and tomatoes and cucumbers and things, sweet peas can grow up the fencing. We can also there plant directly on the ground in some garden beds. These aren't large gardens, 3 to 4 meters, but it's enough space to feed a family of 4 on a regular basis. The picture up on the right-hand side is an illustration of a worm tower, and it's a PVC pipe about a foot wide, maybe 52 centimeters long, where we drill 1-inch holes in 2/3 of it that go below the ground. And food scraps taken from the home can be added in the top, along with straw and wood chips and any other cardboard. Worms will eat most anything, and if you feed them, they'll stay in the worm tower because there's food there. At night or at other times during the day, they'll migrate out of those holes and create air. They'll aerate the soil, and they'll drop their worm castings out in the ground, so that over a short period of time, maybe 45 days or so, you can actually plant your plants around the worm tower and benefit from the fertilizer that the worms have created underneath the ground. Another technique we could use in the bottom right illustration would be to stack some straw bales around the sides of walls and then add some compost on top, water these bales, soak these bales with water for 10 or 12 days, and they'll begin breaking down themselves into a compost, and you can actually just either seed or put plants right in top of the straw bale and have a garden that way. This is a short list of things off the top of my head that I think we could use to put in a home garden. We're going to need some straw bales. We're going to need some bags of the compost material, some azomite. We can add some worm towers in that really hard-packed, hard clay to get the soil loosened up and get some nutrients down in the ground. We can provide some seeds and onion bulbs and other, we might even be able to provide some strawberries or fruit trees or other berries. Perhaps some vertical fencing would work in occasion. The people may need some hand tools, some simple hand tools. We want to make sure that they have some hose water hoses that they can attach to the side of their house where their water comes out. And then we need a great deal of mulch of some kind, either wood chips or shredded leaves or shredded cardboard to cover the ground around the plants once we have them in the ground. This is the worm tower as seen from above. You can see the holes that I drilled 3/4 of the way down. The worm tower is sitting on top of the ground, but what I would do is dig the hole and bury it, maybe leaving 3 or 4 inches of the top above the ground. And then you just start adding straw and wood chips and leaves and your food scraps and other cardboard and paper, shredded paper, all of these kinds of things the worms will use for their bedding and for their nesting and for their reproduction, all the while breaking down, eating the food scraps and breaking them down into a rich, nutritious, nutrient-rich composted material. This is the organic composted fertilizer that's being produced in Suleimania. I don't know of any other sources of composted material available, so we will probably be using their material to get things going until we can till the compost operation gets going and we can produce our own. Is the azomite product. This is minerals and rare earth elements that are mined in Utah that have been found to be an essential, critical part of good soil. These minerals and trace elements are necessary for the uptake of the nutrients the plant needs to grow. When I visited Kushtapa refugee camp, there was a pile of this fencing material that I believe is used when they pour concrete floors. They'll put this wire mesh down and then pour the concrete over to stabilize it. But this would be a perfect trellising fence for all kinds of purposes in growing food vertically when you have less space available. Now let's take a look at some garden examples and some of the most nutritious vegetables to grow. This was a bare piece of ground at a location outside of Lincoln where we came in and we put down underneath the black compost material you see there, we put a layer of straw down, maybe 6 to 8 inches deep, and then we added the compost material a good 6 inches on top of that, and then we put the wood chips down the rows and all around it to suppress weeds, to hold moisture, and for walking, so that when you walk on the wood chips, it's like walking on spongy carpet and you're not compacting the ground and the dirt further. This allows any rainfall or any water you put on to soak down deep into the ground and not run off. Here we just simply added about a foot of wood chips and shredded up leaves and made a bed on top of green grass. Those wood chips will kill the grass underneath and will hold the moisture in and start breaking down immediately. We subsequently added 6 inches of composted material on top and were able to plant directly into the material. Here are 2 more examples of different locations where we were able just to put the compost material right on top of the ground, extremely thick, and put wood chips or straw down the rows for walking purposes, and we were able just to go ahead and seed directly into the material right away. You can see here that within 45 to 60 days we have quite a bit of vegetables growing in those beds. including slide 65, which are snap peas, slide 66, a huge stand of garlic. Slide 67 is an Italian kale, very rich nutrient green to eat. Slide 68 is spinach. Slide 69 is a section of Swiss chard. It's a stalk of broccoli. Curly leaf kale. Slide 73 is just another month later. You can see how things have continued to progress, and we don't have any weeding to do because we've mulched so heavily around the plants, and we haven't had to water very much at all, if at all, because the mulch keeps the water under the ground and keeps it from evaporating. Illustration of some kale. Slide 75. This is the Japanese eggplant that did so very well on that one plant, and you can see how many of those eggplants we were able to produce. This is actually the second year of this particular garden, and before we started it in the spring, we just went ahead and added another layer of composted horse manure, and then redid the rows in between with more straw, again to suppress the weeds, hold the moisture. Different examples of the kinds of foods, the nutritious greens and plants that we want to try to do, including parsley, beets, squash. You see a stand of Swiss chard in slide 80 and the rainbow chard in slide 81. I was very impressed. We actually got some Iraqi cucumber seeds and planted those in Nebraska in slide 82, and they were just absolutely fantastic and very prolific. They would have kept growing and growing and growing and producing if the weather hadn't gotten colder and changed. Slide 83 is the mint. 84 is the beets. And 85 is the rhubarb stand, a perennial that I like. I like strawberry rhubarb pie. 86 is me holding the beets and carrots that I had picked for the evening meal that night. Slide 87 is a section of strawberries that have done very well. Slide 88, 89, 90, 91 are examples of a straw bale garden that we installed. You simply stack the straw bales down these rows, soak the bales until they start breaking down and heating up inside, and then you plant directly into the straw bales. And in this case, in slide 90, you see a crop of potatoes, and then slide 91, you see cabbages just growing right out of the top of the straw bales. Slide 92 are two of the worm towers I installed about 6 feet apart, and they have lids on them. You just simply lift the lid off and continue to feed the worms food scraps, and they're moving down underneath the earth back and forth 3 feet in all directions and providing rich, nutritious soil under the ground for that small planting of spinach that we started. Slide 93 is a crop of potatoes. Slide 94 and 95 are booths that were at the food conference show that we attended in Erbil. These are the kinds of things grown locally in Erbil and in Sulaymaniyah. All of these things, wonderful vegetables that we could do at any of our gardens. Last but not least is the community garden project at the Kushtapa refugee camp. We want to create this garden next to the school. We can do the home gardens on the grounds along the perimeter fencing and also in front of people's homes. We're going to want to reestablish contact with the relief organizations, the UN relief organizations, and the camp director. Probably going to need to take some soil samples, kind of study the gray water drainage and runoff mapping, maybe do some water testing, and look at some ways we could collect some rainfall in those times when water is so scarce. We'll be meeting with Kushtapa camp officials to sign some agreements and some mutual understanding so we're all on the same page. We want to hold some community workshops and seminars and provide some educational handouts for the residents, maybe register some of those participants so we can keep track of their gardens and monitor them. And then we're going to be delivering a great deal of agricultural inputs like the composting materials and a great deal of mulching materials like the wood chips and the straw. Hopefully we'll be able to put a compost building on the location and use the food scraps from the camp itself to begin building our own soil, so we don't have to bring it in all the time. We just make it on site. This is a map layout of the camp, and if you look closely, you can identify the school and the field. You can see it pretty much right there in the middle, upper middle of the picture, and that's where the community garden is going to be put in. Slide 98 gives you a satellite image of the camp, and it's illustrative of the way in which water is draining down to the top middle of the picture there, where you see the dark areas, and it happens really to be right in front of the school where we're in the football field where we're going to put the community garden. So if we can find a way to filter the gray water from the showers, and we can find a way to collect water and divert it towards our garden area, this is going to help supply us with a great deal of the water we're going to need during the dry season. Here I am standing in front of the piece of land next to the school. The school would be on the right of the slide, and there's a road on the left-hand side of the slide where you see the tents. But from where I'm standing back as far as you can see, that's going to be the area in which we can put in the community garden. And I firmly believe that that's going to be enough ground to provide everyone in the camp with some nutritious vegetables almost year-round. This is an area along the back fence. It's actually maybe 10 meters wide and probably 300 or 400 meters long, where we can also put in gardens. The homes that are nearby can work those gardens for themselves. Grandma and some of her grandchildren who ventured out of the camp and found some wild greens to pick and are sitting down and cleaning those up and getting ready to cook those for lunch. Slides 102 and 103 are two of the only examples I found of people trying to grow some of their own food at the camp, which I applaud. The difficulty is that their soil is so dead and lacking so much that it's hard to believe that anything grows there. Slide 104 is another section along the perimeter fence. It's not very wide, maybe 6 feet, 8 feet, but it's enough to install some gardens along there, and we could actually even grow some cucumbers or tomatoes or climbing vines right up on those fences. Slide 105 is an example of someone who's actually built up a small wall and has a small section there that could be used for a garden. They just lack the the soil, seeds, and things to get it going. Slide 106 is a good example of vertical growing, fence trellising. This just happens to be all flowers, which is fine. But it also, you see by the vertical gardening that it actually provides some shade to the building, to the tent unit there. During the hottest times of the year, that shade will help cool that residence.